So let's dive in on this.
Yeah.
Now, one other thing I did forget to mention, this is what I knew I was forgetting something, but it's not a bad idea to bring some of your scope mounting hardware. So like a torque wrench with the proper bits for your rings and mounts out to the range with you, because as you actually get shooting, now in our semi-live scope mounting video, we talked about getting the proper eye relief, getting the proper, just setup for your scope so that it's comfortable and you can see well behind the optic on maximum power, because then you know you're going to be good on lower powers. But as you actually get shooting, that you may find that you're slightly off, or you may find that, for whatever reason, you thought you were level, but you're not quite level, or whatever it is. So you want to, it's not a bad idea to just bring that along just in case.
Yeah.
So, but Ryan's got this, it's Tika, all kind of just rested up here. And this Tika, in this case, has a cheek rest, like an adjustable cheek riser embedded in the stock or integrated into the stock. And so he's got that removed, because what we're going to do first is bore sight. And so bore sighting essentially consists of removing the bolt. In the case of a bolt gun, like we have here, just traditional style bolt gun, we're removing the bolt. I've done it before with bore sights. I've just removed an AR upper from the lower, for example. Take out the bolt carrier group, take out the charging handle. And then you can see just from the back of that upper receiver down the barrel. It really helps out. And then you can bore sight. I'll essentially just rest the upper in, again, sandbags like this, and then you're able to just glance up and down between the scope and the rifle, which we'll get into that process here. But essentially, what we're saying is it doesn't have to be a bolt-action rifle to do this properly. A lot of rifles have some means of taking the bolt or parts of the action out that you can see from the back of the rifle or the back of the receiver down the barrel, and that's kind of what we really want to do here.
Yeah.
So why don't you dive in on this process here, because you remove the bolt.
So, yeah, one more note on bore sighting. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and when we're doing this method, and if you get a chance to watch the video and see what we mean by bore sighting, it will make a lot of sense. I am physically looking down the barrel right now, like through the bore. I see the rifling, the lands, and the grooves, and what I'm doing is I'm centering the target in the middle of the bore to the best of my ability. So right now I've got it looking at one of our large black targets downrange. It's centered in my bore, and then I'm referencing my scope. As you get familiarity with a particular rifle, you'll find that its alignments are pretty consistent. I shoot this rifle a lot. I shoot it several times a week. And its alignments are really well known to me. And so when looking at it now, I'm not surprised to see where my bore sight lands with my scope in its mechanical center. So if your scope if you're taking it off of one gun and putting it on another, you may not find that it's in a predictable spot. But knowing that this optic was centered and putting it on this gun, I'm glad to see that it's exactly where I'm used to it being. And on bore sighting too, there's a number of different devices available for you if you have one of those guns, like let's say a Marlin 336 or a Winchester 94 or a Browning BLR, that you cannot remove the bolt to peer down the barrel very easily. Or
what about an AK?
Or an AK? Could you do an AK? No, an AK wouldn't work that well. Yeah, anything like that, you can get an arbor type or a cartridge type insert that goes either in the end of the barrel or in the chamber itself that projects a visible laser downrange. They work. I found that they're not as reliable as doing this method for a number of different reasons, but they do work well. And so I encourage you, if you've got a gun like that, if you got a firearm like that, utilize one of those devices so that you're not expending a ton of ammunition just trying to find yourself. Start at a closer distance too, like 25 or 50 yards.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so let's say somebody's literally at the range and they're listening to this now and they've got an AK or they've got one of those kinds of rifles and they're like, well, rather than going home and just saying, I'm going to have to, hang up the shoes for this day or whatever, you can still do it. And what Ryan just alluded to at the very end there, start at 25. And if you're ultimately zeroing at 100, which we will have to get into that, by the way, zero distances. But if you're ultimately zeroing at 100, start at 25, because essentially we're dealing with angles. We've mentioned that a couple times before. And angles, you could have a 30-degree angle from your rifle, and that's going to take up less space closer to the rifle than it does way down range, right?
Yep.
And so you're much less likely to be, if your gun and scope happen to be way off when you mount up the scope, you're much less likely to have your rounds go off target to the point where it's just really hard to understand what you need to adjust. And you're much more likely to at least get rounds on target, and then you can adjust to kind of a loose 0 there, bring it out to 50, and then it will change slightly, but you can at least know that once you finally kind of inch yourself out to 100 yards, you're not going to be shooting, just zinging them away off target, and you'll at least be able to have them on paper so you can make proper adjustments. So,
yeah. Continuing on, I'm going to make my first adjustment into the rifle scope. And again, this is just during the bore sighting process yet. So I've, again, centered the target in my bore. I'm going to double check that here because I touched the gun. And without putting any influence on the rifle, so we want to keep it as still as possible. Looking through the barrel, or centering that target up, and then looking through the optic and adjusting the optic until the reticle moves to a point in which we want to call it bore sighted. Now, it's been my experience, and I think a lot of different rifles or shotguns or weapon systems may be different, but at 100 yards, I found that when I bore sight, it's actually advantageous for me to have, of course, the windage lined up on the optic, but to have the elevation actually below my target. And looking down range here, I'm going to use my reticle to measure this real quick.
Significantly below, or just a little bit?
Yep. So I found it's best. I'm currently 4 minutes of angle beneath my target, so about 4 inches below the center point on that. And I think I'm going to end up making an adjustment further when we do fire this thing. But that seems to have been the trend over the past dozens and dozens of rifle scopes that I've shot, is being actually below the intended target seems to work better. So I'm going to call this bore sighted. I'll double check it again. So I'll just set up again.
Now okay, here's one thing that we get a lot. Back when I was on social media a ton and helping people out, people would message in and they'd ask, hey, my turrets are backwards. And
this is question.
This is probably the only time that I can think of, the only time when you actually want the reticle to move. Like if you want the reticle to move to the right, you would think that you would move the turret in the direction where the arrow is pointed to the right.
Right.
But you're actually doing it the opposite. And this is the only time that it's the opposite, because you are physically moving the reticle. So essentially, if you want the reticle to physically move to the right to match up with your barrel, you actually want to spin it in the left direction, the windage turret in the left direction, which seems all crazy weird, but that's ultimately going to make it so that when you're actually shooting and you're actually impacting rounds on paper or on steel, let's say then that impact was to the left and you wanted to move it to the right, or the other way around, you would actually you're moving the actual impact downrange.
Correct.
With the turret.
The way I best describe it is remembering that the rifle scope actually is not connected to the bullet or anything like that. It can't drive it. The way that we do this is we force our muzzle. So if we land left, what do we have to do with our muzzle to move that impact right? We have to force the muzzle right? Mm-hmm. So we have to move the scope left so that we then bring it over further to the intended point of impact, or point of aim.